My wife is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I'm a nobody in her marketing department. The morning light sliced through a gap in the blackout curtains, painting a stripe across the bedroom floor. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the woman still sleeping beside me. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, the youngest and most formidable executive in New York City. And me, Ethan Hayes, just another mid-level manager in her marketing division. An accident 7 years ago had thrown our lives onto the same track. Who would have believed it? A regular guy from the marketing pool marrying the company's heir apparent. The real kicker? Our marriage was a secret. No one at the office had a clue. I knotted my tie, staring at my reflection. At 30, the lines around my eyes were starting to set. Compared to Victoria's effortless, blue-blood confidence, I looked painfully ordinary. Her father was a titan of finance, her mother a partner at a white-shoe law firm. My parents were retired public school teachers from a small town in Ohio. "You have the board meeting today," wore the charcoal suit. Victoria's voice, already awake, cut through the silence. She was propped up against the headboard, watching me. She was always like that, her concern disguised as a command. "Understood, Ms. Sterling," I said, my tone deliberately formal. She frowned, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. We left the penthouse a few minutes apart, a silent, practiced routine. She took the private elevator down to her waiting town car in the garage. I rode the crowded employee elevator to the main lobby. 7 years of this life, 2 parallel lines that never truly met. The lobby was buzzing with the usual morning gossip. "Heard Sterling is closing the acquisition deal today. God, that woman's an ice queen. Who'd ever marry her? Keep your voice down." I lowered my head and walked faster, a sharp pain twisting in my chest. They had no idea the so-called ice queen used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder every night. Lately, though, even that small comfort had vanished. In the elevator, I ran into Julian Vance, Victoria's executive assistant. He was young, handsome, and impeccably dressed, and he always looked at me with a thinly veiled contempt. "Morning, Ethan," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Heard your team's KPIs were at the bottom of the pack again last quarter." I just nodded, not giving him the satisfaction of a response. I was used to the digs. Victoria never asked about my life at the office. In her world, it probably wasn't even a footnote. In the boardroom, Victoria was already commanding the room, laying out the quarterly report. She wore a tailored black suit that made her look like a beautiful, dangerous weapon. I sat in the back row, a ghost at the feast, watching the woman who was my wife in the eyes of the law, but a stranger in every other sense. Next, marketing will present their proposal for the new product launch. Her gaze swept the room, landing on me for less than a second. I stood up, my palms sweating. I pulled 3 all-nighters on this proposal, but standing here now, I felt my confidence shrivel. As I spoke, I saw Victoria glance at her watch twice. Julian was whispering to the person next to him. "Stale concept. The data is weak," Victoria said when I finished. Her feedback was quick and brutal. "Do it again." After the meeting, I hid out in the stairwell, the burn of a cigarette doing little to soothe the sting of humiliation. My phone vibrated. A text from Victoria. "Client dinner tonight. Won't be home." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back a single word. Okay. 7 years, and our conversations have been whittled down to the bare essentials, less like a husband and wife and more like roommates who barely tolerated each other. It was pouring when I left work. I was debating whether to splurge on an Uber when Victoria's black Bentley swept out of the private garage. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw her in the back, talking to Julian. They were sitting close, their heads nearly touching. The rain soaked through my shirt, but I couldn't feel the cold. This marriage had been a mistake from the very beginning. I should have known better. Why would the CEO of a global corporation ever truly love a guy from marketing? I turned and walked into the downpour, my mind made up. Tonight, I was going to talk to her. 7 years was long enough. This ridiculous charade had to end. I remember that night 7 years ago with perfect clarity. I was 3 months into my job at Sterling Enterprises, still green, and trying to keep my head down. My manager had grabbed me at the last minute, telling me to put on a tie and fill a seat at some industry gala. The ballroom at the ST. Regis was a galaxy of chandeliers and champagne flutes. I felt like an imposter in my rented tux. In a quiet corner, I saw a woman standing alone in an emerald green gown. She looked like a single, perfect stalk of bamboo in a field of chattering birds, completely out of place yet utterly captivating. It was Victoria Sterling, the boss's daughter, just back from Wharton to take her place in the family empire. "Ethan, take this over to Ms. Sterling," my manager hissed, shoving a glass of champagne into my hand. "And try not to spill it on her." My hand was sweating as I walked over. When she took the glass, her fingers brushed mine. She pulled her hand back quickly, a slight frown creasing her brow. "You knew," she said. Her voice was cool and clear. "Ethan Hayes, marketing. 3 months," I mumbled. She just nodded, her attention already drifting. Just then, a waiter leaned in and whispered something to her. I saw her expression tighten before she followed him toward a side hall. Something felt wrong. The waiter's eyes were shifty, and his name tag was crooked, like he'd pinned it on in a hurry. I put my glass down and quietly followed. At the end of the hall, 3 men had cornered Victoria. One of them was Chadwick Prescott, the smarmy heir to a rival real estate group. The other 2 looked like hired muscle. "Come on, Victoria. Have a drink with us. We can be friends," Prescott sneered, holding out a glass. Or tomorrow's headlines could be about the Sterling heiress making a fool of herself. Victoria's face was pale, but she stood tall. "Chad, you have no idea what you're getting into." "Consequences?" He laughed. "After we've gotten acquainted, your old man will be begging me to be his son-in-law." A hot rush of anger went through me, and I stepped forward before I could think. "Ms. Sterling, your father is looking for you," I said, my voice loud, placing myself between her and Prescott. Prescott's face darkened. "Who the hell is this?" "Get lost." One of the thugs shoved me. I grabbed his wrist and used his momentum to throw him over my shoulder, a move I'd learned in a self-defense class in college. The other one came at me, but as I dodged, Prescott kicked me from behind. I slammed into the wall, my head hitting the plaster with a dull thud. "Call security," I yelled at Victoria. In the chaos, Victoria's stiletto heel came down hard on Prescott's foot. As he howled in pain, she grabbed my arm and we ran. We didn't stop until we were in the parking garage. Her hands were shaking as she fumbled for her car keys. "Get in," she commanded. She drove for miles before pulling over, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I realized then that my forehead was bleeding where I'd hit the wall. Victoria rummaged in her purse and handed me a tissue, her own fingers still trembling. "I'll take you to an emergency room," she said. "It's nothing," I said, pressing the tissue to the cut. "But you—" "Prescott won't let this go." She gave a short, cold laugh. "He won't say a word. This story makes him look worse than it makes me look." The car was silent. I stole a glance at her. Her eyelashes were long, her profile so perfect it looked like it had been carved from marble. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. I shrugged. It was the right thing to do. "No," she said, shaking her head. Most people would have looked the other way. When she dropped me off at my walk-up apartment, it was raining hard. She hesitated, then reached into the back seat and handed me a black umbrella. "See you on Monday, Ethan," she said, using my first name for the first time. I still have that umbrella. It has her initials V.S. engraved on the handle. I found out later that she'd given her driver and security detail the night off to handle another emergency. If I hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. A week later, I was summoned to the CEO's office. Victoria sat behind a massive desk, the skyline of Manhattan framed behind her like a painting. "I'm promoting you to be my executive assistant. Double your current salary," she said, getting straight to the point. I was speechless. That job was usually reserved for Ivy League MBAs or people with connections. "Why me?" She put down her pen and looked me straight in the eye. "Because you're not afraid and you're not greedy." She paused. "And you're discreet." Just like that, I went from a cubicle dweller to the CEO's right-hand man. I followed her into boardrooms and back-alley deals, learning the brutal truth behind the polished facade of the corporate world. And somewhere in the middle of all those crises, something between us began to change. Until one rainy night, after a major project fell through, I found her drunk in her office. When I took her home, she grabbed the front of my shirt and slurred, "Ethan, marry me." I thought it was just the whiskey talking. But the next morning, she showed up at my apartment with 2 copies of a prenuptial agreement, her eyes disturbingly clear. "My lawyers drew this up," she said. "I need someone who won't betray me. Sign it." I should have said no, but for reasons I still don't understand, I signed my name. Maybe it was because from the moment I saw her at that gala, the gears of my life had already shifted, turning toward a destination I couldn't see. The day I signed the prenup, Victoria took me to the courthouse. There were no flowers, no rings, not even a smile. The whole thing felt more like a merger than a marriage, except the contract was for life. "You'll move into my penthouse after this," she said as she drove. "You can use the guest room." I watched the city blur past the window, a knot tightening in my throat. "Why me, Victoria?" She stopped at a red light, her manicured fingers drumming on the leather steering wheel. "You saved me," she said, then added, "and you're uncomplicated." Uncomplicated. No messy family ties, no bad habits, a clean background. She sounded like she was assessing an asset. "Most importantly, you aren't like everyone else, trying to get something from me." I managed a bitter smile. So that's what I was. The safe choice. That first night in her penthouse, I tossed and turned in the guest bed. The place, perched high above Central Park, was so large and empty it felt suffocating. Every surface was polished and cold, just like its owner. At 5 a.m., a noise from the kitchen woke me. Victoria was already dressed for work, making coffee. She gave me a slight nod. "Morning. You know how to use the espresso machine?" "Yeah." I walked over, accidentally brushing her elbow. She immediately took a step back. That deliberate distance defined every day of our marriage. She gave me a supplementary credit card that I never used. She had her driver offer me rides to work, but I always took the subway. For her birthday, I cooked a special dinner, but she ended up working late and never came home. 3 months into the marriage, Sterling Enterprises faced a hostile takeover. Victoria didn't come home for a week. I finally went to the office with a change of clothes and some stomach medicine for her. When I pushed open her office door, she was asleep at her desk, her head pillowed on her arms. The computer screen was still glowing, a half-empty cup of cold coffee beside it. I gently draped my coat over her shoulders. She woke with a start, grabbing my wrist in a vice grip. "It's me," I said softly. She let go, rubbing her temples. "What are you doing here?" "Just checking to see if you were still alive," I said, trying to make a joke. I placed a thermal container on her desk. "Eat something." She watched as I unpacked the still warm food. For a single moment, the armor around her seemed to crack. "Thank you," she whispered, picking up the fork. I stayed with her at the office that night. Around 3 in the morning, she finally gave in to exhaustion and fell asleep, her head resting on my shoulder. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume mixed with fatigue. In that moment, she didn't seem like a CEO, just a woman who was tired and vulnerable. But when she woke up the next morning, the walls were back up, as if her brief moment of dependence had been nothing but a dream. The years passed like sand through an hourglass. 1, 2, 3. Our marriage settled into a strange kind of symbiosis. We played the part of a loving couple at company events, but at home, we were 2 strangers sharing a zip code. In our 5th year, her father had a stroke. I spent 2 weeks at the hospital, driving Victoria back and forth, helping to look after Mr. Sterling. One night, she came out of his room and found me still waiting on a bench in the hallway. Her eyes were red. "You should go home and rest," she said. I stood up and handed her a cup of warm milk. "You need it more than I do." She took the cup, her fingers cold against mine. We sat there in silence, the sterile smell of the hospital filling the air. "My father always wanted me to marry someone from a good family," she said suddenly. "He still doesn't understand why I chose you." My heart clenched. "Yeah, why did you?" She turned to look at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something deep and unreadable. But then it was gone. "Go get some sleep. You have that presentation tomorrow." That was the closest we ever came to a real conversation. A single match struck in the dark, then immediately extinguished. In our 7th year, Victoria closed the biggest international deal in the company's history. At the celebration party, she drank more than I'd ever seen her drink. When I helped her home, she leaned against me, her breath sweet with the smell of expensive wine. "Ethan," she murmured my name. My heart sped up. "Yeah. Tomorrow. Remind me to review the quarterly reports." I sighed. a bitter smile on my face as I helped her into bed. Even dead drunk, her mind was on work. As I pulled the covers over her, my hand brushed against her cheek. She unconsciously nuzzled against my palm, like a cat seeking affection. The intimacy of that small gesture was a physical ache in my chest. It was only in moments like these, when she wasn't in control, that I felt like I truly had her. The next morning, she was back to her old self, already dressed in a power suit and reading spreadsheets at the dining table. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Coffee's made." I poured myself a cup and sat down opposite her. The morning sun streamed in, casting a golden halo around her. 7 years, and she was still so beautiful it hurt. "Victoria," I said, working up my courage. "We need to." Her phone rang, cutting me off. After a short, clipped conversation, she stood up abruptly. "The Singapore clients are in town early. I have to go." At the door, she paused and looked back at me. "What were you going to say?" I shook my head. "Nothing. Have a good day at work." The sound of the door closing echoed in the vast, empty apartment. I stared at her half-finished cup of coffee on the table and realized that's what our marriage had become. A cup of cold coffee. It looked fine on the surface, but all the warmth was long gone. I met Victoria's family for the first time 3 months after we were married. It was for her father's 60th birthday party at the Sterling family estate in Greenwich. That morning, Victoria tossed a sleek designer box onto the bed. "Wear this," she said. "Be ready by 6. Don't be late." Inside was a ridiculously expensive, custom-tailored suit. As I stood in front of the mirror fumbling with the tie, Victoria came up behind me and adjusted it with practiced ease. "Too loose," she murmured, her fingers brushing my skin and sending a jolt through me. "Listen, no matter what you hear tonight, just smile." The Sterling estate was a sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged in the English countryside. The moment we walked in, the butler gave me a look that could have stripped paint. The great hall was filled with the glittering elite of New York finance and politics. Victoria took my arm, her smile perfect, but her body was as stiff as a board. "Victoria, darling, is this him?" A woman dripping in diamonds said, her eyes raking over me like a scanner at a checkout counter. "Aunt Carol," Victoria said with a nod. "This is Ethan." "Oh, the one for marketing." Her aunt's red lips curved into a smirk. "I hear your parents are teachers." I tightened my grip on my champagne glass. "Yes, in a public high school." "How quaint," she drawled, then turned back to Victoria. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof, you know." Victoria's expression didn't change. "Excuse us, Aunt Carol. We're going to wish Dad a happy birthday." As we walked away, she whispered, "Don't let her get to you." "I'm not," I said, tugging at my collar. "I should have just worn my own suit." She glanced at me. "Your only other suit is a rental from that charity auction. You never even cut the tag off." I froze, stunned that she had noticed a detail like that. Harrison Sterling sat at the head of a long table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Even sitting down, you could tell he was a formidable man. Victoria had his eyes. "Dad," Victoria said, leaning in, "Happy birthday." He grunted, his gaze falling on me. "So this is the one you chose." I stepped forward, respectfully offering the gift we brought. "Mr. Sterling, happy birthday. This is a little something from Victoria and me." "Mr. Sterling." He gave a cold laugh. "You're married and you're still calling me Mr. Sterling." A few people nearby tittered. My face burned. "Dad, happy birthday." He ignored the gift and turned back to Victoria. "William Astor's son got back from his hedge fund in London yesterday. You two should have lunch." Victoria's face was a mask. "I'm married, Dad." "You call it a marriage?" he boomed. "No wedding, no announcement. For all anyone knows, you're just playing house." My palms were sweating. He was right. Our marriage was a transaction, a business arrangement. "Dad," Victoria's voice was ice. "If we're not welcome, we can leave right now." He slammed his hand on the table. "Insolent girl." The entire room fell silent. All eyes were on us. We were prisoners in the spotlight. "Harrison, don't be angry." A handsome man in a navy blue suit interjected smoothly. "Victoria was just having a bit of fun." He called her Victoria. The casual intimacy made my stomach clench. This must be the Astor boy, the perfect match. "Ethan, is it?" he said, turning to me and extending a hand. "A pleasure. I hear you're in marketing at Sterling." I shook his hand. "That's right. Marketing," he said with a knowing smile. I'm sure that's very fulfilling. The snickers from the surrounding crowd were quiet but sharp. In their world, my job was less than nothing. At dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table next to Victoria's cousin, a spoiled trust fund kid who kept pouring me whiskey and prying into our love story. Seriously, man, he slurred, leaning in close. How'd you do it? My cousin is the original ice queen. I gripped my fork. We love each other. Love. He laughed loud and long. Come on, everyone knows what this is about. She just needed to piss off her father, so she grabbed the first random guy she could find. His words were like a knife in my gut. He was right. Even an outsider could see the truth of our marriage. After dinner, Harrison called Victoria into his study. I stood out in the garden, trying to breathe, but the cold night air couldn't ease the ache in my chest. Can't take the heat? It was Aunt Carol, smoking a cigarette in the shadows of the veranda. You should end it. It would be better for both of you. I turned to face her. Thanks for your concern, but we're doing just fine. Don't pretend, she said, exhaling a plume of smoke. Victoria has been fighting with her father her whole life. You're not a husband. You're a weapon. I stared out at the dark hills in the distance. Her words were a mirror, showing me the ugly truth I'd been trying to avoid. Victoria looked pale when she finally came out. We didn't speak on the drive back to the city. It wasn't until we were surrounded by the lights of Manhattan that she spoke. I'm sorry about tonight. It's fine, I said, watching the streetlights streak by. Your family is right. I'm not good enough for you. She slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming against the asphalt. Listen to me, she said, turning to face me, her eyes glittering in the dark. I chose you for a reason. What they think doesn't matter. What matters is what you think. I stared at her, stunned. It was the first time in 7 years she had ever defended our relationship, even to me. The words died in my throat. I wanted to tell her that I loved her, that I had from that very first night at the gala. I wanted to tell her that even though it started as a sham, it had become real for me. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care what anyone else thought, that I would always be there for her if she needed me. But all I said was, I understand. A look of deep disappointment crossed her face. She turned away and started the car again. In that moment, I realized we were both waiting for the other person to take the first step, both held back by pride and fear. Back at the penthouse, she went straight to the master bedroom, the click of the door sounding like a final, weary sigh. I stood alone in the living room, looking at our wedding photo on the wall. We'd had it taken after the courthouse. We were standing a foot apart, two stiff figures with 4 smiles. 7 years, that photo had hung there, a testament to a well-rehearsed performance. And tonight, I finally understood my role in it all. A prop, a placeholder, a convenient shield. The tragedy was, even knowing all of that, I couldn't stop loving her. It was a rainy night. I remember it perfectly. I just finished a brutal week of quarterly audits, 3 days of nonstop work that left my eyes feeling like they were full of sand. It was after 11 when I finally dragged myself back to our building, the cold rain hitting my face. That's when I saw it. A familiar black Mercedes, Victoria's company car. But tonight, Julian Vance, her executive assistant, was behind the wheel. I ducked behind a pillar, not even sure why I was hiding. Rainwater trickled down my neck, but I didn't feel it. All the blood in my body seemed to be pounding in my temples. The car stopped. Julian got out, opened an umbrella, and hurried around to the passenger side. He carefully helped Victoria out. She was unsteady on her feet, leaning heavily against him. He put one arm around her waist to support her, the other holding the umbrella over their heads. They were pressed together, moving as one. Watch the step. I heard Julian's voice, soft and solicitous. Victoria mumbled a response, her head resting on his shoulder. In the dim glow of the streetlights, I could see her face was flushed. She was clearly drunk. The look on Julian's face as he gazed down at her. It was a look of pure adoration that made my stomach twist into a knot. They walked toward the entrance like that, an intimate couple returning home after a night out. The rain blurred my vision, but the image was seared into my brain, his hand on her waist, her hair brushing against his cheek. I stood there in the rain, feeling something inside me shatter. In 7 years of marriage, Victoria had never once shown me that kind of vulnerability, that kind of reliance. She was always the perfect, unbreakable statue, composed even when she was drunk. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Victoria, sent an hour ago. Client dinner tonight. Won't be home. I stared at the message, a bitter smile twisting my lips. So this was her client dinner. This was her not coming home. I watched the elevator numbers climb, then waited in the hallway alcove on our floor. I saw Julian guide Victoria to our apartment door. He took the keys from her purse with a practiced ease, as if he'd done it 100 times before. The door opened, he steered her inside, and then it clicked shut, the sound echoing in the silent hall. I waited outside for 10 minutes, maybe longer. Rain dripped from my hair onto the plush carpet. My mind replayed a highlight reel of damning evidence. The knowing looks between them in meetings, the way his fingers would linger when he handed her a coffee, the whispers I'd heard around the office. Suddenly, the door opened. Julian stepped out, straightening his tie. He froze when he saw me. Then a smug, victorious smile spread across his face. "Ethan, working late?" he asked, his eyes pointedly taking in my soaked clothes. "Ms. Sterling had a little too much to drink. I was just seeing her home." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Thank you for taking care of my wife." "My pleasure," he shrugged. "After all, for the last 7 years, I'm the one who's been taking care of all her needs." The blood rushed to my head. I wanted to smash his perfect teeth in, but I just stepped aside and let him pass. Fighting him would only be stooping to his level. Inside, the apartment was dark. A thin line of light shone from under the master bedroom door. I could hear the faint sound of the shower running. Victoria, washing herself with the soap I'd picked out, getting ready to sleep in the bed whose sheets I changed every week. I sat on the living room sofa, soaked to the bone, with no desire to change. On the coffee table was a glass of water, 2 aspirin, and Julian's silk handkerchief, his initials embroidered in the corner. The bathroom door opened. Victoria emerged in a silk robe, her hair still wet. She stopped short when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice raspy from the alcohol. "I live here," I said calmly, my own voice sounding foreign and distant. She rubbed her temples. "I mean, why are you all wet?" "Forgot my umbrella," I said, standing up and heading for the study. "You should get some rest. I have some work to finish." She started to say something, but then just nodded and went back into the master bedroom. The sound of her door closing was like a guillotine, severing the last thread between us. In the study, I opened my laptop and found the file I'd prepared 2 years ago, the divorce papers. I'd looked at them after every fight, every cold shoulder, but I'd never had the courage to act. Tonight, I hit print. As the printer whirred, I scrolled through the photos on my phone. There weren't many of us together. A polite, arm's-length shot from a company Christmas party. A picture I'd taken of her back as she walked ahead of me on a rare vacation. And that fake, sterile wedding photo. 7 years and not a single, genuine picture of us as a couple. The papers were done. I signed my name, my hand surprisingly steady. The decision had been brewing for so long that the final act felt strangely peaceful. At 3 a.m, I lay on the study sofa, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the soft sound of her breathing from the other room. The rain had stopped. Moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting prison bar stripes across the floor. I stared at them, remembering that other rainy night, the black umbrella, and her voice saying, "See you on Monday, Ethan." I never could have imagined it would end like this. Not because of our different backgrounds, or her family's disapproval, or even her coldness. It was ending for the oldest, most cliché reason in the book, betrayal. In the morning, I would leave these papers on the dining room table, pack my bags, and walk away. 7 years of my life, undone by a few sheets of paper. It was laughable, and it was final. The morning sun felt like a physical blow. I woke up on the study sofa, my shirt stiff and wrinkled from drying on my body overnight. The divorce papers were on the dining table, right next to a steaming mug of black coffee. Victoria's morning ritual. She sat opposite me, dressed in a sharp gray suit, her makeup perfect. You'd never know she'd been drunk just hours before. "What is this?" She nudged the papers with a manicured finger, her voice a sliver of ice. "It's exactly what it looks like. A divorce agreement," I said, pulling out a chair. "As per our prenup, we each keep our own assets and split anything acquired during the marriage 50-50. I've already signed." Her eyes scanned the document, her face growing paler by the second. "Is this because of last night?" "Not just last night. I said, taking a sip of coffee. The bitterness was overwhelming. This whole marriage was a mistake, Victoria. We both know it. Julian just gave me a ride home, she said suddenly. Nothing happened. I laughed, a hollow sound. You don't have to explain. 7 years, Victoria. What has there ever been between us? She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. In the harsh morning light, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight tremor in her lips. The invincible woman was finally showing a crack. I thought. Her voice was barely a whisper. I thought we were doing okay. Okay? I repeated the word, a lead weight settling in my chest. Right. Civil. Professional. A perfect business arrangement. She shot to her feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. What is it that you want, Ethan? I want a wife, not a CEO who I happen to be married to, I said, standing to face her. I want someone who asks me how my day was, not someone who leaves cold notes on the counter. I want you to love me. The words caught in my throat. It was too late for that now. Victoria stood frozen, a perfect marble statue. Only her trembling hands gave her away. We faced each other across the table, 7 years of our lives hanging in the balance, weighing nothing at all. Fine, she said finally, her voice regaining its usual cool authority. I'll sign. She picked up a pen and signed her name with a crisp, efficient stroke, just like she was executing any other contract. I watched her form the letters of her name and remembered her doing the exact same thing at the courthouse 7 years ago. Calm, detached, and cold. I'll be out by tonight, I said. Don't be ridiculous, she said, closing the folder. I'll stay at my parents' place for a while. You can stay here. No, thank you, I said, shaking my head. I've already found a place. Her lips parted as if to say something, but she just nodded. As you wish. An hour later, my bags were packed. There wasn't much to take. Most of my belongings were acquired during the marriage, and technically half hers. I didn't want any of it. I packed one suitcase with some clothes, my laptop, and the old black umbrella with the initials V.S. engraved on the handle. Victoria stood by the door, her back to me. About the office. I'll submit my resignation today, I said, zipping the suitcase. I won't be in. I'll email my team to manage the transition. That's not what I meant, she said, turning around. Her eyes were shockingly red. You can stay at Sterling. And watch you and Julian play house every day? I gave a bitter laugh. No, thanks. Her lips trembled. Ethan, you can't possibly think I would. It doesn't matter anymore. I cut her off, grabbing my suitcase. I wish you the best, Victoria. As I walked out the door, the sunlight was blinding. I had walked into this marriage with nothing, and I was leaving the same way, except for a heart that felt like it had been torn to shreds. The divorce was unnervingly efficient. The prenup made everything clean. No arguments, no drama, just the dissolution of a business partnership. Victoria didn't even show up to finalize the papers. She sent her lawyer instead. Ms. Sterling asked me to tell you that you can contact her if you need anything, the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. I just smiled. As I walked out of the city office, a light rain began to fall. I didn't open the umbrella. I let the cool drops mix with the hot tears running down my face. Leaving my job was just as simple. The HR manager looked at me with pity. The news of our divorce had already spread through the office like wildfire. As I was clearing out my desk, Julian leaned against the doorframe, a look of fake sympathy on his face. Such a shame, Ethan, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. We'll miss having you around. My coworkers stared. I calmly placed the last of my books into a cardboard box. Take good care of Victoria, I said, looking him straight in the eye. He was momentarily speechless, thrown off by my composure. As I walked to the elevator, I could feel his glare burning into my back. The elevator doors slid shut, and for the first time in 7 years, I could breathe. I was free. Free from the marriage, free from the company, free from living in Victoria Sterling's shadow. My new apartment was small, on the far east side of the city, but it was filled with light. I lay on the bare floor of the empty living room, staring at the ceiling, feeling the simple pleasure of an easy breath. My phone vibrated. A text from Victoria. Are you settled in? I stared at the message for a long time, then put the phone down without replying. A divorce is like an amputation. It hurts like hell, but you have to make a clean cut if you ever want to heal. As night fell, I opened my laptop and started working on my resume. 30 years old. It wasn't too late to start over. This time, I would be living for myself. Not as someone's husband. Not as anyone's secret. Outside, the lights of the city began to flicker on, one by one. I knew one of those lights belonged to Victoria. But from now on, it had nothing to do with me. 3 weeks after the divorce, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Hello. I finally answered, heavy breathing, then the clink of glass against glass. She was drinking. Ethan. Her voice was slurred, thick with a vulnerability I had never heard before. My stomach, it hurt so much. I sat bolt upright. Did you take your medicine? It's in the medicine cabinet, second shelf. I can't find it, she whimpered. You always had it ready. Her words were a knife in my gut. For 7 years, I had tracked her schedule, stocked her favorite coffee, reminded her to eat, and left a glass of warm milk on her desk when she worked late. I had woven myself into the fabric of her life so completely that only now, by my absence, was the pattern revealed. What about Julian? I said, forcing my voice to be cold. Have him get it for you. A long pause. He's not my assistant anymore. What? I fired him, she whispered. That night, he tried to, but I pushed him away. My hand tightened around the phone. What was this? A late confession? A pathetic attempt at an apology? Victoria? I took a deep breath. What you need right now is a doctor, not an ex-husband. I'm sorry. Her voice broke, and she started to cry. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I messed everything up. I was stunned. It was the first time in 7 years I had ever heard her apologize. The proud, untouchable Victoria Sterling was sobbing into the phone like a lost child. Don't hang up, she pleaded. Please, just talk to me, like you used to. I closed my eyes. Go to the kitchen, I heard myself say. There's a backup supply in the little cabinet next to the espresso machine. I could hear her shuffling around, following my directions. I could picture her perfectly, barefoot on the cold marble floor, her silk robe falling off one shoulder, her dark hair a mess around her pale face. This was the Victoria only I had ever seen. I found it, she said weakly, followed by the sound of her swallowing the pills. Now go lie down on the sofa. I instructed, my tone becoming automatic. There's a blanket folded under the coffee table. How do you remember everything? She murmured, her voice soft and disarming. Because I love you. The words burned my tongue, but I swallowed them down. What good do they do now? Just get some rest, was all I said. Ethan, she said, her voice suddenly urgent. I want to see you. My heart skipped a beat. Why? The digital lock on the door is broken. I can't find the warranty card. It was a terrible, clumsy lie. I almost laughed. The CEO of Sterling Enterprises couldn't find a locksmith. Victoria, he sighed. Don't do this. The line went silent. For so long, I thought she had fallen asleep. Then, just as I was about to hang up, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I got used to someone making my coffee every morning and leaving a light on for me when I came home late. I got used to. Her voice trailed off. I got used to you. My eyes burned. In 7 years, it was the closest she had ever come to a confession of love. Sleep, I said, my voice hoarse. The medicine will kick in soon. You won't hang up? She asked, her voice small and scared. I won't, I said, lying back down and placing the phone on the pillow next to me. I'm right here. I listened to the sound of her breathing, slow and even, until she was sound asleep. The sky outside was beginning to lighten when I finally, gently, ended the call. My chest was filled with a tender, unfamiliar ache. The next day, my doorbell rang at noon. I looked through the peephole and saw Victoria standing there. She was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, no makeup, with dark circles under her eyes. She was holding 2 large bags of takeout and nervously biting her lip. I opened the door. Her familiar perfume washed over me. I was in the neighborhood, she said, holding up the bags. I got some of your favorite sushi. It was too much for one person. I looked at her, knowing she must have driven clear across the city to be in the neighborhood. My heart felt like it was in a vice. Come in, I said, stepping aside. She entered cautiously, her eyes taking in my Spartan apartment. They landed on the small framed photo on my nightstand. Our wedding picture, the only thing I'd taken from my old desk. She froze. Is your stomach feeling better? I asked. She nodded, clumsily unpacking the containers of sushi. She looked nothing like the corporate shark who dominated boardrooms. I spoke to my lawyer. We can still withdraw the divorce filing. I stopped, my chopsticks hovering in midair. The afternoon light slanted through the window, illuminating the slight tremble of her eyelashes. Why? I asked softly, her fingers twisted together in her lap. Because I realized what? That life was inconvenient without a live-in assistant, that she missed being taken care of. I realized I love you, she finally whispered. The words were as light as air, but they hit me like a hurricane. I was frozen. The 3 words I had waited 7 years to hear, delivered over a box of takeout sushi on a Tuesday afternoon. It's too late, Victoria, I heard myself say. The color drained from her face. I know I don't have the right to ask, but please just give me one more chance. Just one. I looked at her, at the tears welling in her eyes, and I thought of that rainy night 7 years ago, the warmth of her fingers when she handed me the umbrella. Fate was a cruel joke, always waiting until the worst possible moment for us to understand our own hearts. The sushi is getting cold, was all I could say. The light in her eyes dimmed, but she forced a smile. Right, we should eat. We ate in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. But I knew that some things, once said, could never be taken back. And some things, once broken, could never be truly whole again. As she was leaving, she hesitated at the door. I'll wait for you, she said quietly, for as long as it takes. After she left, I slid down the wall and sat on the floor. My phone buzzed. It was a text from her. The lock wasn't broken. I just wanted to see you. I stared at the message, a tight, painful knot forming in my chest. Even Victoria Sterling could be brought low by love. I just didn't know if her realization had come in time to save us. Victoria began to appear in my life with a gentle, relentless persistence. A good morning text at 7 a.m. Sharp. Lunch, always my favorite dishes, delivered to my new office. Her car, parked outside my building late at night, just in case I needed a ride. It was a clumsy, almost teenage-like courtship, so unlike the decisive woman I knew. My new coworker started teasing me. Ethan, is the CEO of Sterling Enterprises trying to woo you? I would just smile and say nothing. A month later, my doorbell rang on a Saturday. It was Victoria, holding a thick binder, her eyes shining. I had my lawyers draft a new agreement, she said, walking past me and spreading the documents on my coffee table. It nullifies the prenup. All assets, current and future, including my controlling shares in Sterling, are to be considered joint marital property. I glanced at the dense legal text. My heart seized. It meant that if we divorced again, she would lose half of everything she had ever worked for. It was a concession no CEO would ever make lightly. Why? I asked, closing the binder. She stood by the window, the sunlight framing her in gold. Because I want a real start this time. No safety nets. No secrets. Victoria, I took a deep breath. We tried. It didn't work. Because I was a fool. Her voice rose, sharp with emotion. For 7 years I was blind. You remembered every little thing about me. You put up with my moods, my obsession with work. And I never even told you I loved you. Her voice broke. It was the second time I had ever seen her cry. Not all mistakes can be fixed, I said softly. Give me 3 months, she said, grabbing my hand. Her palm was cold. If, after 3 months, you still want me to leave, I promise I will never bother you again. I looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes, and thought of the late-night phone calls and the clumsy sushi delivery. The Victoria I married would have never humbled herself like this. Why 3 months? She bit her lip. Because the doctor said the first trimester is the most critical. My mind went blank. What? She placed a hand gently on her stomach. I'm 4 weeks pregnant. It must have been that last night before you left. I staggered back, knocking over a glass of water on the table. It seeped into the papers, blurring the carefully worded clauses. The last night, her unusual passion, the suddenness of her pursuit, it all clicked into place. You're doing this because of the baby? My voice was a raw whisper. No. She shook her head fiercely. It was only after I found out that I understood. I want this. I want this family. I want you. Family. The word sounded so foreign coming from her lips. In 7 years, she had never called our penthouse a home. It was always the apartment or the residence. Victoria, I said, my voice strained. You don't build a marriage on a child. It's not for the child, she nearly shouted. Ethan, look at me. She forced me to meet her gaze. Her eyes, usually so calm and guarded, were filled with a raw, pleading vulnerability. I love you. Not because you're familiar, not because I'm having a baby, but because you are you. The sun caught the tears on her lashes. The invincible CO was gone, replaced by a woman laying her heart bare. 3 months, I heard myself say. You have 3 months. She collapsed into my arms, her tears soaking my shirt. I held her, the familiar scent of her shampoo filling my senses. I remembered holding her like this once before, 7 years ago at the gala. Then, she had been clinging to me out of fear. Now, it was for something else entirely. That night, I moved back into the penthouse. The only thing that had changed was that our wedding photo now sat on the master bedroom nightstand. Victoria, giddy with relief, showed me the empty room she had already designated as a nursery. Do you think blue or yellow? She asked. Either is fine, I said, stroking her hair. As long as it's ours. She grew quiet, leaning her head on my shoulder. I'm sorry it took me so long. I didn't answer, just held her tighter. 3 months. 90 days to see if what we had was worth saving. This time there would be no prenup, no hidden agendas. Just 2 broken people, 1 fragile hope, and the unexpected promise of a new life. Late that night, I saw a light on in the study. Peeking through the door, I saw Victoria sitting on the floor, flipping through the wedding album she had never once opened. In the moonlight, I saw her gently trace the outline of my face in one of the photos, a look of profound tenderness on her face. And in that moment, I realized that maybe the love had been there all along. We had just been too proud and too foolish to ever say it out loud. 2 weeks into our 3-month trial, Victoria's campaign to win me back intensified. A bouquet of white roses on my desk every morning. Her appearing in my company's cafeteria at lunchtime, sitting with me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her car waiting for me after work every single day. Victoria, I finally said one afternoon, cornering her in my office where she was, for some reason, organizing my files. This has to stop. You're making it impossible for me to work. Her hand stilled. A look of hurt crossed her face. I was just trying to help. I don't need your help, I said, closing the folder I was holding. We need to talk. She sat opposite me, looking like a chastised schoolgirl. I noticed the dark circles under her eyes, more pronounced than before. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I know you feel guilty, but this over-the-top compensation isn't healthy for either of us. It's not guilt, she interrupted. Ethan, I'm trying to... The office door burst open. My boss, Mark, stuck his head in. Ethan, you're not going to believe this. The whole company's just been acquired. I frowned. By who? Sterling Enterprises. Mark said, his face ecstatic. Then he noticed Victoria. Oh, Ms. Sterling, I didn't realize you were here. I whipped my head around to look at Victoria. She had the grace to look ashamed. You bought my company? I asked, my voice dangerously low. She bit her lip. I thought it would be a good strategic move, and it would give you more opportunities. Oh my God, I said, standing up. A heavy weight was pressing down on my chest. Do you know what this is? This is control, Victoria. It's the same thing you always do. No, it's not, she said, standing as well. Isn't it? I shot back. Making unilateral decisions that affect my entire life. Just like you did 7 years ago when you decided we should get married. The color drained from her face. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see my co-workers staring. Not here, I said, grabbing my jacket and pulling her out of the office. Down in the parking garage, I let go of her wrist. A red mark was already forming on her pale skin. She didn't complain, just looked at me with those wide, wounded eyes. What do you want from me? I demanded. I want to make things right, she whispered. With money? With power? I shook my head in disbelief. You still don't get it, do you? You have no idea what the actual problem was. Then tell me, she cried, her voice echoing in the concrete space. Tell me what to do. I've never had to do this before. Her voice cracked, and in the dim light, I saw tears shimmering in her eyes. It hit me then that maybe she, the great Victoria Sterling, really didn't know how to love someone. I don't want flowers or promotions, I said, my anger deflating into exhaustion. I wanted respect. I wanted trust. I wanted... what? I wanted you to be faithful. The words were lodged in my throat. The image of that rainy night flashed in my mind again. Julian's arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. Never mind, I said, turning to leave. We both need some space. This is about Julian, isn't it? She asked suddenly. You still don't believe me. I stopped, but didn't turn around. I believe what I saw. He made a move on me, and I pushed him away, she said, rushing to stand in front of me. I fired him. What more do you want me to do? I want you to go back to him. I finally exploded, all the poison I'd been holding back spilling out. If you two were so close, then why are you wasting your time with me? The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Victoria stumbled back as if I'd physically struck her. The garage was silent except for the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I see, she said, and then she laughed, a sound more heartbreaking than any sob. So that's what you think of me. After 7 years, that's the kind of person you believe I am. She turned and walked to her car, her back ramrod straight, but I knew she was crying. I had broken something in her, the one part she had never shown to anyone else. Victoria, I called out, my anger instantly replaced by regret. She didn't look back, just raised a hand in a small, final wave. Don't worry, I won't bother you again. The roar of her engine filled the garage, and then she was gone. I stood alone in the sudden silence, feeling a profound and terrifying emptiness. I had won the argument, but I had lost everything else. Back in my office, an all-company email confirmed the acquisition. It was followed by my own promotion notice. Vice President of Marketing reporting directly to the CEO's office. Congratulations, Ethan, my colleagues cheered. With a patron like Victoria Sterling, you're set for life. I forced a smile, my heart feeling like a stone in my chest. My phone lit up. A text from Victoria. I've accepted your verbal resignation. It will be effective tomorrow. You'll receive the maximum severance package. I stared at the message, unable to reply. When I got back to my desk, there was a box on it. Inside were all the gifts I had ever given her over our 7-year marriage. A necklace I'd saved for 3 months to buy her. A rare first edition book she'd once mentioned wanting. A framed photo of us from our first and only date at Coney Island. At the bottom was a sealed envelope with my name on it in her elegant script. I didn't have the courage to open it. I took the box home and sat in the dark, watching the city lights. Was she out there somewhere, sitting in the dark too? My phone rang. An unknown number. Ethan Hayes, a man's voice asked. This is Julian Vance. I gripped the phone. What do you want? I just thought you deserved to know the truth, he said, his voice laced with amusement. Ms. Sterling was very drunk that night, but you might be interested in what she said when she pushed me away. What? Don't touch me. I'm married. Julian let out a cold laugh. Ridiculous, isn't it? Everyone knew your marriage was a sham, but she just kept holding on, protecting it, even when you clearly didn't give a damn. His voice faded into a drone. All I could hear was Victoria's pained question. After 7 years, that's the kind of person you believe I am, and the image of her trembling shoulders as she walked away. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, with no idea where to find her. The penthouse? Her office? Or had she already disappeared from my life for good? The cold night air hit my face like a slap. I had been using that rainy night as an excuse, a shield. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of being betrayed. I was afraid of letting myself love her again, only to be hurt. And now, I might have lost her forever. 3 days later, Victoria's new assistant called. She said Miss Sterling had a high fever and was refusing to go to the hospital. When I got to the penthouse, the door code had been changed back to our wedding date. I let myself in. The air was thick with the smell of whiskey and sickness. Empty bottles and scattered files littered the living room. Victoria was curled up on the sofa, her face flushed, wearing one of my old, worn-out button-down shirts. You came, she rasped, struggling to sit up. Don't worry, it's not a trick. I'm actually sick. I touched her forehead. It was burning up. On the table was a glass of water and some fever reducers. Why didn't you take these? I asked. I did, she coughed. Didn't work? Without another word, I scooped her up into my arms. She was terrifyingly light. We're going to the hospital, I said. She tried to struggle. No, I just need to sleep. Shut up, I said, tightening my grip. For once, you're going to listen to me. She went still, burying her hot face in the crook of my neck. In that moment, I realized it was the first time in 7 years she had ever completely surrendered to me, without any conditions or calculations. The diagnosis was pneumonia. She needed to be admitted. Lying in the sterile hospital bed with N4 in her arm, she looked small and fragile. I sat by her side, watching her, a tight knot of guilt in my chest. "You can go," she said suddenly, her voice weak. "You don't have to pity me. Just rest," I said, offering her a glass of water. She didn't take it. She just stared at me. "I finally understand why you wanted a divorce." I waited, being suspected by the one person you're supposed to trust. She said with a bitter smile, "It doesn't feel very good, does it?" My hand tightened on the glass. She was right. I had used one single, unconfirmed moment to invalidate 7 years of her life, just as her family had done to me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She shook her head. "I deserved it. How much security did I ever give you?" The room grew dark as the sun set. The only sound was the steady drip of the floor. Victoria's hand slipped out from under the covers and rested on top of mine. It was still hot with fever. "Ethan," she said quietly, "do one last thing for me." "What is it?" "My father's birthday is next week. Come with me, just for the party." She coughed. "Think of it as a dignified end to our 7 years. After that, I promise, I will leave you alone." I looked at her pale, exhausted face and nodded. Maybe she was right. It was time to end this where it all began. A week later, Victoria was discharged, though she still looked frail. The night before her father's party, she texted to ask if I needed anything, her tone as formal as a business email. I told her I was fine, and the conversation ended there. The day of the party, I put on the suit she had bought me all those years ago and drove to pick her up. She was waiting outside, wearing the same emerald green gown she'd worn the night we met. When she saw the car, she froze. "You bought a new car?" she asked as she got in. "It's a rental," I said, handing her a gift-wrap box. "It's for your father. A jade chess set. You said he liked chess." She took the box, her fingers trembling slightly. "You remembered." I didn't reply, just started the car. The drive to Greenwich was silent and tense, like two strangers on their way to a funeral. The Sterling estate was ablaze with lights. When Harrison Sterling saw us arrive together, he was visibly surprised. "Dad, happy birthday," Victoria said, handing him the gift. "Ethan picked it out for you." "Mr." Sterling looked from the box to me, his expression unreadable. "It's a surprise to see you two together." "Isn't it?" Her Aunt Carol chimed in from nearby. "So civilized, to remain friends even after the divorce." The ambient chatter in the room died. Victoria went pale. I stepped forward and put my arm around her waist. "Who said we're divorced?" Victoria whipped her head around to look at me, her eyes wide with shock. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. If this was the dignified end she wanted, I would play my part. The party was a blur of fake smiles and empty compliments. I noticed Victoria seemed distracted, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd. "You okay?" I murmured. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." Halfway through the evening, a familiar figure walked in, Julian Vance. He went straight to Mr. Sterling, who greeted him warmly, like a favored son. My body went rigid. Victoria must have felt it, because her hand found mine. "I didn't invite him," she whispered. "I know." "Ethan," she started to say, "the truth is..." Just then, Julian saw us. A malicious grin spread across his face. He walked over, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Well, if it isn't the ex-husband. How sentimental, Victoria, bringing your cast-offs to family events." The air crackled with tension. I felt Victoria's hand go cold in mine. "Julian," she said, her voice dangerously low, "watch what you say." "Why? Did I say something untrue?" He shrugged. "Everyone knows you two are." "We're fine," I interrupted, pulling Victoria closer. "But thank you for your concern." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Are you? Then why has Ms. Sterling been drinking herself into a stupor every night? Why has she?" "That's enough," Victoria snapped. "I want you to leave." "On what grounds?" Julian sneered. "Harrison invited me. Unlike some people who don't seem to know when they're not wanted." I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw. He stumbled back, crashing into a tower of champagne flutes. The sound of shattering glass and gasps filled the room. "Ethan!" Victoria cried, grabbing my arm. Julian wiped a trickle of blood from his lip, his face contorted with rage. "Hit a nerve, did I? You want to know what you really saw that night? You saw her turning me down. You saw her choosing to stay faithful to a dead marriage and a husband who thought she was trash." "Shut up." Victoria lunged forward and slapped him hard across the face. "You're fired. And if you ever come near me or my company again, I will destroy you." The room erupted in murmurs. Harrison Sterling marched over, his face thunderous. "Victoria, this is a party." "Dad." Victoria's voice shook with fury. "This man, the one you've been grooming, the one you wanted for a son-in-law, he tried to assault me when I was drunk." The color drained from Mr. Sterling's face. Julian panicked. "She's lying. She came onto me." "Security!" Harrison roared. "Get this piece of filth out of my house." In the chaos, I pulled Victoria outside into the garden. In the moonlight, her shoulders were shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She looked up, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Would you have believed me? In your eyes, I was already a heartless monster." I reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. It was warm against my skin. For 7 years, we had been two blind people stumbling in the dark, hurting each other because we couldn't see what was right in front of us. "I'm sorry," I said. She shook her head and pulled a folded document from her clutch. "This is for you. It legally nullifies the divorce papers. You don't have to sign it." I took the document from her hands, and without looking at it, I ripped it in half. Victoria stared at me, speechless. "You." "Victoria Sterling," I said, dropping to one knee and taking her hand. "Will you marry me again? For real this time. No prenup, no secrets. Just you and me." Tears streamed down her face, splashing onto our joined hands. You don't hate me." "I did," I said honestly, "but I hated myself more for being a fool who almost lost you." She fell into my arms, sobbing like a child. In the distance, the sound of the party faded away. Here, in the quiet of the garden, we had finally found our way home.